Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. Today on my podcast, I have someone who I heard a couple of months ago on a broadcast that Stephen Hurley does in his morning, my afternoon. And she was somebody that I immediately connected with and reached out to her, and she said, yes, I'm really busy, but we'll figure this out. And so finally she has some time. I'm so excited to have you on, Dana Fulwiler. Thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for having me. It is a real honor. So I'm grateful to be here and glad that our schedule is aligned.
Yes, finally. So I didn't really say too much about your background, what you're doing, what you have done. Tell our listeners a little bit more about you.
So I am an educator, it's in my heart, and it's kind of all that I've done. So has been around education. So I was a public school teacher starting in 2006. I taught junior high for a number of years, and then high school, a range of different subjects. And throughout my experience teaching, I started to develop this passion for well-being and just seeing it as such a foundational piece to the learning process and also just growth of humans in general. So that took me on a lot of different pathways. I did a Master of Education focused on whole school well-being and building a culture of school well-being. And then I started teaching psychology at the high school and learned about positive psychology, actually through teaching psychology. And every semester, my students, it just really resonated with them. It resonated with me as a human and my colleagues, just this idea of a strength-based approach, and, that we should be just as focused with what goes right with us as we are with what goes wrong. Sure. So I've just been so fascinated with that field, seeing the impact it's had on me and on my students and colleagues. So pursued a master's in positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And since then, I've since become an assistant instructor in that program, which is a continued honor for me to be a part of the program. And I currently also am a sessional instructor at the University of Calgary in their Bachelor of Education program. So I get to work with pre-service teachers, which is also a huge honor. And it's actually a well-being course and talking about comprehensive school health, and really cool to be a part of that in the teacher education space too, which I think is super important. So teacher education and teacher well-being has been a huge passion of mine, but really well-being overall and well-being science. So that's kind of the world I'm in now, and doing different facilitations and workshops for schools, organizations, and consulting and just supporting in any way I can.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so that's where part of the connection is anyway. I know there were some things that you talked about with Stephen, and the whole idea of being connected and the idea of well-being, which is so important. So the first question I usually ask my guests is, if I say the word belonging or feeling a sense of belonging, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think of comfort and connection, and also curiosity and growth. So having the comfort to be you, to take risks, to ask questions, to be vulnerable, and to learn and grow and change and evolve, and to be wrong. And, all the while through that process, feeling a sense of connection to self and to your world and to the people around you. The curiosity, I think, comes in because I think our sense of self-belonging and community belonging are constantly evolving.
Right.
There's us to connect to who we experiences. So I think of comfort and connection, and also curiosity and growth. you know, having the comfort to be yourself, to take risks, to be wrong, to ask questions, to learn and grow and evolve, you know, all the while feeling that sense of connection to the world around you, the people around you, and perhaps most importantly to yourself. And then the curiosity for me, I think, comes in because our sense of self-belonging and community belonging are in constant evolution. So it requires us to connect to who we are, the lessons we're learning along the way, and also lean in and learn from those life experiences and from those around us. And just be curious about, you know, ourselves and about others, because our identity shifts, you know, through life experience. So just being open to that, but I think of belonging as having that comfort and connection to be able to grow and evolve.
Yeah. I love the idea of curiosity in that mix. In all of the episodes that I've recorded, nobody's ever really connected the idea of being curious and having that idea for searching for, and I guess that's one of the things, if I think of it now, because I never thought of it before, started me on this whole journey to belonging, was my curiosity about when people said to me, how do you feel comfortable in Buffalo, New York and Kuwait? There's just so different. How do you feel, you know, at home in both places? And so you're right. It was that curiosity and searching for, but I just never thought about it until you mentioned it just now. So thank you. That's wonderful.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, it's kind of, I have these conversations, you know, my husband and I talk about these things a lot, actually. And that's something we were, you know, just reflecting back on both of our childhoods. We both grew up in really small communities in Saskatchewan, and such, you know, great experience, great childhood growing up. The sense of belonging sometimes came in the way of like fitting into what, you know, you really felt that community was, or who your identity should be based on, you know, the place that you're currently in. And just the curiosity that we both had about what, who we are, what we want in life, you know, we both kind of wanted to explore, and that curiosity to learn from other people who were around us, but also just seeing the world as like this big curious place that, you know, we wanted to go and belong in. But that constant evolution too of self-belonging, of who am I, who do I want to be, and that sense of comfort with yourself, I think, again, is something, it's like a daily ongoing learning journey for me. I think for all of us, you know.
Well, it should be, I think. Maybe we don't think of it that way. And for those who, you know, the question I want to ask is, were there many people in your communities who moved out and were curious enough to sort of explore? Because I know I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I had many people when I was growing up say to me, I never want to leave Buffalo. Some had never been outside of Buffalo. They were perfectly happy just to do things inside. They never traveled anywhere. So I'm curious and Buffalo isn't that huge, but it's probably bigger than where you grew up. What was that like? Were you sort of different? You felt that there was something else out there, and the fitting in just wasn't who you were. You weren't sure.
Yeah, I think that looking back, you know, I also celebrate those who did what they wanted to do for their own self, you know, for those who stayed, you know, the choice, I guess, of being able to do what you want with your life, whether that's, you know, the way that they grew up and wanting to raise a family there, or, you know, whatever their choice may have been. I know for Shane, my husband, he graduated with, I think, 6 or 7 people. So really small.
Wow.
And was really excited to go and adventure and experience different things. And I also have friends who did that, and also just their heart belongs in that place that we grew up in. And so they felt this desire to go back. But I think growing up, I felt, some sort of pressure wherever it came from. It wasn't really from my family at all. They've always been encouraging to go do things. But just to, you get married, you have the house, you have the job, you have the kids and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's just this acceptance of, and that comes over time with confidence too, of like, oh, I can go and just experiment and try different things. And then you make a choice based on who you are authentically and who you want to be in the life you want to live. Because I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in, outside messages that affect us, even if they're not intentional.
Yes.
They might not be intentionally doing that, but that's something that just influences our decisions. And I think over time, I've been able to realize, and I still am more and more, what those, I guess, myself and my own choices and where they're born from, if that makes sense. So, recognizing, oh, is that actually something I want to do? Or is that like rooted in something else?
Yeah, that self-awareness is so important, that, sort of metacognition of being able to really know what you know and realize that you're knowing it, which sounds kind of weird, but yes, absolutely. The whole idea of being able to determine, this is what I need to do. And like you said, for some people, just staying where they were was fine. They were happy doing that. And for those who ventured outside the realm of that small town, maybe ended up back because they decided that's what they were more comfortable, where they were more comfortable. So you're right. Yeah, it is this whole idea of journey and self-discovery. And it does take a lot of confidence. People told me, oh gosh, you moved so far away or whatever. And I said, well, I followed the love of my life. So I don't know that I was so adventurous, but I suppose if you look at it the way people do from the outside, I guess it was. So
well, and I think that like when you feel that sense of belonging within yourself, and that deep connection to who you are, which again, I think evolves over time, but then wherever you go, there you are, and you can belong wherever, because that sense of belonging. I mean, I think there's two sides to it. There's that sense of self-belonging, and then we're wired to connect with other people too. So we really crave and need that as well. But I think that's been really magical as I've gotten older and developed more of a connection to my self-belonging, that you start to realize, you get a bit more comfortable, I guess, getting outside your comfort zone and moving into spaces where you maybe don't yet have a community through work or, the place you live.
Right. Yeah. And the whole idea is having that self-confidence. It's like Brene Brown talks about the fact that you have achieved that sense of belonging, that self-belonging, when you don't feel lonely when you're alone. Right? That it's okay to be alone, but you don't feel lonely. And it really hit me because it's exactly what you said, that you have that sense of, I don't feel worried about the fact that I'm by myself. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So, and it is something that we develop over time. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it has a ripple effect, like if you are feeling, if you have that strength, that kind of like, that does affect who you are in the world and the way that you can interact and support other people.
Well, it makes for healthier relationships. That's for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm interested in the applied positive psychology. And you mentioned it a little bit in terms of course, your master's and the course that you're teaching for the University of Pennsylvania, and also the work that you're doing as a mentor and with pre-service teachers. Talk a little bit more about that for our listeners who don't know what applied positive psychology is and how you got interested in that.
So positive psychology as a field is really a response to, well, I'll tell you just a brief history of it. Dr. Martin Seligman became the president of the American Psychological Association in '98 and was a clinical psychologist, really had studied depression a lot. And at that time, just kind of introduced this idea that psychology as a field could be just as focused with what goes right, as I said earlier, with us, as it is with what goes wrong with us. And then so born is this field, which now has, a wealth of research behind it in the things that bring us joy and meaning and positive relationships and, the impact of positive emotions and, building strengths and resilience and the impact that has across sectors. So now there's a lot of subfields: positive education, positive neuroscience. And the applied piece in the degree it's pretty remarkable. People coming to the field are from all different fields. So in my class, there's educators and, psychologists and people in the business world and lawyers, like from all different sectors, coming to learn about how we can take a proactive approach to supporting well-being and mental health in all these different areas.
Yeah, instead of waiting for the negative to happen and then try to treat it afterwards. I love that.
Exactly. And so on the individual level, and then also at, the organizational and community level as well. Sure. So I support, one of the class I support in the MAPP program is taught by Dr. James Pawelski on positive interventions. So looking at, different ways that we can intervene and support through these proactive strategies in various sectors, and looking at the philosophical theories behind that, and also the scientific approaches and the studies that have been done so far. And the support with the pre-service teachers, I just think it's all interconnected and everyone can benefit from this work. For sure. And I think it really connects to belonging in so many different ways, but it's the combination of us developing ourselves and our own well-being practices, and then also as systems and organizations, and coming together and thinking about how we can best support each other.
Yeah. So I kind of want to get into, especially now with all that's going on. It's been almost a year now, or about a year, and we're in this traumatic situation. Mental health is, at the forefront, and trying to sort of keep our heads above water. And you mentioned in your background information different areas, and also in, when you talked about your bio, different areas that you're applying this positive psychology. So I'd like to sort of go through one by one so that our listeners can see some of the actual applications of that you are working on. So I want to start with creating a sense of belonging, or using that applied positive psychology as a teacher in your classroom. What does that look like? What are the kinds of things, like with the pre-service teachers, do you talk to them about?
Well, one of the things, because right now that course is online, and that's a totally different space to be, cultivating connection and a sense of belonging. So some of the really actionable tools and strategies, Dr. Adam Grant, who guest lectured in MAPP, talks about, starting conversations with big talk versus small talk, and asking like the types of questions we ask that dig out stories and experiences, versus the, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Great.
the superficial.
The kind of passive. So for example, with my class, we start every class with a 1-to-1 breakout room check-in with a big talk question. So a big talk question might be like, what are you proud of from this past week? Or what was your biggest blooper from the past week, and just normalizing those kinds of things, especially as new teachers. or what are you excited about in the week ahead? What is bringing you joy right now? Like those kinds of questions that tease out, again, our stories and experiences and help us connect and empathize with each other. There's a whole, list of different scaffolded questions for vulnerability to help us build psychological safety in groups and teams too. I think that's been a really actionable thing, is just, and in, high school and junior high too, thinking about cultivating those opportunities to connect on a deeper level and strengthen those connections with those big talk questions, and even getting students to generate them. They, back to that curiosity piece, like what kinds of things can we learn from each other?
Right.
And I think one of the other skills for strengthening connection, building high quality connections, is a strategy called active constructive responding. And that's another one that I've used a lot and introduced to new teachers as well. It's really just about the way we respond to people's good news. And I find that as teachers, we sometimes like shy away from, and people, I think in general, we don't want to seem braggy. So we tend to not.
Teachers especially. Yes.
Oh yeah. We are so, yes, exactly. So I just really want to encourage us educators and new teachers to share good news, because the science is really clear. It's mutually beneficial if we share good news with someone and they actively respond to us. So the ACR process is about asking probing questions and being really curious. It comes back to that curiosity. It's like, tell me more about that. And you help them relive the experience, help them, see that there's genuine interest in knowing about this win. And again, the research is really clear that it gives such a positive well-being boost to both parties. And then we're more likely to share good news in the future. So if a student, comes to you and says, wow, like you're my favorite teacher, or, whatever the case may be, like go share that with someone. And then if someone's sharing their good news with you, actively, constructively respond to it. Ask them, tell me more about why that's important to you. How did it make you feel? What does it make you feel now? Who was there? What happened? And I think we can even build that into existing structures in schools, like in a staff meeting.
Sure.
You could start with just connecting with one other person and saying, like, tell me something good. What went well this week? And then building on that by asking questions.
Yeah, that's so gratifying for the person who might not even really have thought that it's such a big deal. The fact that the other person is really interested and begins to ask questions about it. So, that's extremely gratifying. It's a wonderful way to celebrate that moment or that occurrence or whatever happened. And we don't celebrate those things enough because we're so into the negative and so into trying to problem solve all the time that we tend to think of those things instead. And I like the way you started talking about colleague to colleague. And in a staff meeting, that was going to be sort of my next situation. In the right now there's a lot of tension. Some teachers are in the building, some teachers aren't in the building. In general, just sometimes the atmosphere in a building is rather toxic. I've worked in situations where some teachers were favored and other teachers felt left out or whatever. So how do we create those what are some other ways we can create those positive experiences? And for administrators, and for instructional coaches and things like that, what can they do in order to sort of do the kinds of things you're saying, which is celebrate, listen to the positive stories, but not with the toxic positivity where that's all we think about, right? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think that people are, rightfully really sensitive to that right now, because it just dismisses and minimizes our very real challenges right now. It's really not about happyology or just like think positive, but really honoring. I think that is a big thing that leaders and all of us as colleagues can do for each other, is to honor where we're at right now and honor the full spectrum of our experience. So I think there's lots of different ways to do that. I'm going to talk about mattering in a minute, but even just acknowledging, like one other thing that I've done in sessions before and with my class is like a 2-word check-in, like 2 words that describe how you're feeling right now. And, if you can smudge them, even better. So my go-to that I've been feeling a lot this year is nervous sighted. I've been feeling really nervous and really excited at the same time. And there's really hilarious smudged words that people come up with, like confused, but it's the acknowledgement that you can hold these 2 seemingly opposite things. Like you can feel and experience fear and apprehension and hope and gratitude at the same time. Even just that acknowledgement and quick check-in can make a huge difference in just feeling heard, and I think that we don't need to underestimate how something that simple, it just means a lot to people.
Because it validates. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of a fun way to do it too, because
it is. I like it. Just hearing it, I'm already enjoying hearing about it. Yeah.
And I feel like that's going to be my go-to because I'm doing a lot of new things right now. So I'm very nervous about them and also very excited. And, it's just.
Yeah. So even for your own personal self, that's the way you're feeling. Yeah. But it's true. Sometimes we feel opposite feelings. It's such a paradox. Yeah.
And it's okay. And Susan David, she has a book called Emotional Agility, and I really respect and admire her. And it's a lot about not staying attached to our, emotions, not over identifying with them. And she has a process that she explains for being able to navigate that, but really that our negative, quote unquote, negative emotions, or the ones that are unpleasant, they also have a lot of messages in them that we can lean into and listen to, but to not over identify. So rather than I am sad, I'm feeling sad right now. And, talking about it as an experience you're having, and a very, very valid one. And I think along those lines too, introducing practices like self-compassion into a school workplace, Kristen Neff's work. I know a lot of educators who have really resonated with that, and school teams who have really been intentional with introducing some of those practices. Right. But I think at the very base level, cultivating a culture of mattering is so important and powerful. So Isaac Prill-Tensky, he's a community psychologist at the University of Miami, and he introduced to our class this concept of mattering. And he talks about 2 essential pieces of that, which are impact and recognition, or feeling as though you have opportunities to add value and that you feel valued. And so that really hit me learning about this. And just how something so simple, like, and to actually conceptualize mattering that way, feeling that we count, feeling that we can make a difference, and then that self-validation too. And that's where that savoring piece comes in, and being able to celebrate our wins and what goes well. And then also to have that validation externally too. That's something that fuels our agency. So that combination, and even just among our colleagues, and I think in our classrooms, thinking in what ways are we, creating a culture of mattering here, where people feel that they have opportunity to add value, and are they feeling valued? Are they feeling recognized? And how can we build those in? I also think that it's most impactful for the school community themselves to ask these questions and answer them for themselves. A lot of my work around whole school wellbeing and things I've read and learned about along the way It's much more powerful and sustainable when it comes from the inside out.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, so just, I think if we can help support with the right questions that you can ask, or the types of questions you can ask your school community, then get the community themselves involved in figuring out what they need and what kinds of practices like these might be helpful. That would also be a great place to start.
Yeah, that whole idea of personalizing the process by taking it, and it starts from the grassroots,
Yes.
which also recognizes the talent and the skills and the knowledge of those you already have on board, parents, all stakeholders,
Yes.
parents, students, and teachers and administrators, everybody who is there as part of the community. And what a great way just to start the validation process from that.
Exactly.
But I want to ask you, because often when we think of that kind of validation, there are things like, I'll bring it to something really basic, like we're going to validate what students are doing. I'm going to validate what students are doing in my classroom. So if they do something good, I'm going to give them a sticker or, a pat on the back or something like that. But you're talking about something much deeper, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that there are, different types of ways that our cup is filled. And, for some, that is also beneficial. Like I get a real charge out of crossing something off my to-do list.
Oh yeah, I know that. I'm with you on that.
And it's like figuring out what works for that student at that time and where they're at and what their comfort level and readiness for that, feedback and connection is. But I do think that it goes beyond the good job and the sticker. And I think it connects back to belonging and identity, because through the process, we're helping ourselves and helping each other discover that identity and discover that self-belonging, because it's a constant evolution, I think. Right. And as teachers, we have a real responsibility to help students figure that out. And we're figuring it out ourselves too, who we are and what those things are, and asking questions. And, for a student who's had a win happen, instead of maybe just like good job or a sticker, maybe asking questions like, what do you feel proud of in what you just did? Or like, how does it feel for you right now to have just accomplished that? Right. And really engage in that conversation, just the next level, I guess.
Yeah. So I think if we're talking about instilling the skills at the basic level for each person to be able, whether child or adult, to be able to have that curiosity, discover on their own, and be able to sort of go out into the real world, fully able to name the feelings, know about the big questions, and almost be able to, have that agency, like you said. So to be able to champion themselves and the others around them, that we all deserve this positivity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the normalizing, I guess, the human experiences we all go through, normalizing the feelings that we feel, normalizing mistakes and learning. And I think all of that comes into it, and normalizing the conversation of strengths, I think too. So that's another piece of the applied, I guess I didn't maybe fully answer your earlier question, but the applied positive psychology excites me, because our whole program was about applying this, like taking these and making it practical and meaningful. But one of the foundational pieces of that is around strengths. And viacharacter.org offers a survey that there's one for adults, one for youth, 11 to 17 years old. And then I think there's one in development for children as well. But just to help us better understand our own strengths, our own character strengths. And then there's a ton of activities and research to back the impact of this too. in using our strengths in new ways, because at the end of the survey, you get kind of a constellation of your character strengths, and your top 5 strengths they come naturally to you. They're energizing. So I've found that really impactful in working with students as well. My high school students, doing the VIA with them. And every semester I would have students who would say, this is the first time I've really thought about my strengths like this.
Amazing. Wow.
In grade 12. So I think that just speaks to, and I hadn't as an adult until I took, the VIA and started thinking about those things. But it's like normalizing that we all have these different combination of strengths, and how cool that is, and what we can learn from each other around that.
Yeah. And then how we can use those strengths to sort of help us with the things that we're still not able to do. Exactly. I remember learning about that when they were talking about the whole idea of learning modalities. And there's this big debate now about whether that really exists and so forth. And I don't remember where I picked it up, whether it was an article or a PD session. Somewhere I picked up the fact that it's really important not to just work on the strengths or sort of look at and teach to the strengths, but to have the students be able to name the strengths, just like you said, and be able to use those strengths to work on the areas that still need improvement, not look at them Absolutely. As weaknesses. And yes. That totally relates to it. So there's obviously science behind it also.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. And if for anyone who is interested in learning more about that, on the VIA Character website, they have a research tab, and they've kind of categorized the different research that has come out over the years with this. And then for educators, characterlab.org is an amazing resource for cultivating all sorts of character strengths, and lots of free evidence-based resources there.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'll include that all in the show notes too, for people to be able to access the resources that you've mentioned and the books that you've mentioned also. Amazing. That so much that I see in the area of the positive psychology, and then actually applying it is so meaningful. And if a school is looking to start somewhere, where is the best place to start? Looking at, if we're looking at a grassroots kind of thing, and let's say maybe it's not the whole school, but there are some teachers who are listening or learning about what you're talking about and are really interested in moving forward. What are the kinds of things they can start doing in order to get that culture moving, the culture of mattering, and all of that? I mean, just basic kinds of things.
I think, first of all, I would invite them to not feel overwhelmed by the wealth of resources out there and all the different things.
That's a good suggestion. Yes.
Because I know
I've felt. Yeah.
I've been there. I've felt that. And that it's just these tiny tweaks, to start. Like, one of the first things I did in my very first school, I connected with one other teacher who also was really passionate about this. And we created just like a well-being team of students and teachers. Nice. And anyone who is interested. And in Canada, there's a framework called Comprehensive School Health that kind of helps to frame that up a little bit about building whole school well-being. But that's what I would suggest, is find some people, and especially kids, and bring in the student voice too.
Right.
Because chances are really good that there's other people in your building who are also really passionate about this and are seeing the need for this type of proactive culture shift.
Yeah.
And so I would start there. And, simple things can be around the VIA strength survey. That's a really simple starting point, where you're just introducing some strength common language. Or little things like gratitude opportunities in staff meetings or in the school. That first school I was at, we created these, we didn't. They were actually in existence before I got there. little postcards, and our mascot was scorpion. So they were called Way to Go Scorpions. And you could go into the office and get a postcard and write a note of gratitude to someone.
Oh, how nice.
And it's such a simple thing, but everyone participated in it. And I still have my Way to Go Scorpions from those years. Like those are the things that mean a lot. So little opportunities like that, where you could weave in a big talk question, a check-in question, the start of your class or the start of a staff meeting. Then if you want to go a bit deeper and think about, a whole school approach that's based on the school's needs, you can design some needs assessments and figure out where things are at and what area you'd like to target. And then search is actually a framework that Lee Waters in Australia has put a lot of work into developing. It's evidence-based, looking at where positive psychology meets education for research. And the search framework just kind of it definitely helps my mind to organize all of the different resources out there. So it stands for strengths, emotional management, attention and awareness, relationships, coping, and habits, and goal setting. So there's different strategies within each of those search pieces. And so her website and paper have a lot, of resources there. And also reach out to me. I'm very passionate about this, and I really, really love to connect with other educators and people who also care about this and are curious about, how to make it happen, how to make it work. Because that's my big mission, is taking like the science and the research piece and putting it into practice. And I know that can be overwhelming. So
yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned not to be overwhelmed or not to start with something really big, to look at a framework and then, sort of it just 2 or 3 people just to start off, because you're passionate about it. So someone who's like-minded, who wants to start, and hopefully it catches on. And if it doesn't, you're affecting the students within your own realm, which is wonderful. It's very meaningful, and you're feeling good about it. So it's something that makes you happy about going into the building every day.
Exactly. And fuels your own well-being, which we totally need too. So
oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I think as educators, especially, that's why, again, it's celebrating our good news is so important, because we come into this field, we're like, I'm going to change the world. I really want to make this huge impact. And we do, human by human, like that's really significant. I'm just so proud of educators overall, but this past year, it just, I feel honored to be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. So inspired.
And what you hear often is, but I didn't reach that one student or those 2 students. And so they're racking their brains as they get off their computer or not get off their computer at the end of the day, trying to figure out how they're going to be able to tomorrow do something different so that they can, rather than sometimes just taking a step back, reflecting and saying, oh, what an impact I had on all of these students. And, we'll get to, I'm going to still keep trying for the others that I didn't reach today.
100%. And it's the intentionality, like we need to be intentional to do that, because, our brains are wired to notice and focus more on the negative. It's helped our ancestors survive. We're hyper attuned to things that are threatening to us, which is the negative or unpleasant experiences. So you could have, the most stellar lesson, and one student or like one thing goes awry, and that's the only thing you focus on.
Yep. At the end of the day, that's what you remember.
Exactly. And to remember that we're wired that way. So that's, you're not bad for thinking that way. It's just, that's why it takes even more conscious effort and intentionality to cultivate the good. And it's not ignoring the bad, but really maximizing on those good and positive moments when they come.
I love that. I love that way of thinking. That's terrific. Dana, is there anything else that we didn't touch on? Any other advice because you gave lots of advice and lots of resources, which, like I said, I'll include in the show notes. But is there anything else that we didn't touch upon that you would like to mention?
I think I'll just reiterate that, you know, as we're navigating these really odd and challenging times and, you know, in education as well, you're not ever alone. And, you know, that's Isaac Pilotensky talks about how mattering can't happen in isolation either. So we've got, you know, these individual pieces that we can work on for our own well-being. And then just to always, you know, reach out for support with what you're doing in your schools, or if you need help yourself. And that sense of belonging sometimes requires us to, reach out, you know, and connect when we need to.
It's that being vulnerable when we feel like we need to appear that everything is okay, but it's not okay. And then day after day, when we try to do that, it really begins to build up. So yes, I love that advice. Yes, reach out if you need anything. You know, and I know especially at this time, everybody's sort of looking at the others and saying, but they've got so much on their plate. Yeah, but they want to know how you're doing. And for us to reach out, if we see that something is happening, that goes for a student or a colleague, just to reach out and say, is everything okay? Asking those big questions, if you feel comfortable doing so, just to make sure that the person knows that they do matter. I love that idea of a culture of mattering.
Yeah, absolutely. And questions like, can I help you with something? You know, or little things like that, just the check-in points and creating a routine around that check-in, I think can help normalize that as well, because it can be, as you say, super vulnerable to reach out and ask for help. So carving out time, you know, in a bit of more of a school routine, let's say, where you are checking in. I'll just mention one more thing too. There's an article that came out in the spring, Brooke Anderson put together. It was on the Greater Good Science Center website. So I'll share this link with you too, but
Perfect.
She developed this list of questions, daily nudges basically to ask yourself through the pandemic. And I found them really helpful, and people I've shared them with have kind of adapted them and found them helpful. Questions like, who am I checking in on today? How am I getting outside today? You know, how am I moving my body today? Some of these like just basic kind of checkpoints. So I've found
reminders.
that very, very powerful kind of daily nudges and reminders, and ways that you might be able to do that with your colleagues, like make it into, you know, an activity where even if it's a weekly walk or something like that, so you can build in connection time, you know, plus some well-being practices.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Dana, this has been absolutely fantastic. More than I even expected. And I've learned so much, and I'm sure that the listeners will benefit so much from all that you've talked about. You mentioned that you're happy for people to get in touch with you. So what's the best way to find you?
So my email, I'll give you my email to add in the show notes as well. I have a website forthcoming, which will also be in the show notes, and on Twitter. So at Dana Fulwiler.
Perfect. Yes. And like I said, or like you said too, that'll all be included. And there are a lot of resources that I want to make sure when I go back and listen, and for the links I'm not sure about, I'll definitely reach out to you for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Dana, thank you again. This has been wonderful. And I hope it's not the end of the conversation, because I'd love to continue it with you in the future when you have time.
I would love that so much. It's been a true honor. I'm so grateful that you reached out and asked me to be on here, Eileen. Thank you so much for the connection.
Yeah. Thank you again, Dana.